Hi everyone. Today we're going to do a quick check-in with our plants and see how they're doing. And we're going to talk about pruning our tomato plants as they grow. So as you can see, both our tomato plant and our cucumber are well above our tomato cage. And this one's just almost above our stake right here. Or it is just getting above our stake. Our cucumber, if you can see, has attached itself with its little spindles onto our tomato cage. And our stake right here, it grabs itself on. That's how it kind of supports itself and holds itself up. But it's getting really tall, keeps stretching up. And you can see that there's a lot of blossoms on here already. And on the bottom right here, there's a couple small baby cucumbers already. So they're doing well. They're getting really, really tall. They have, what you'll notice, probably on your own plants as well, is they have a lot of shoots right here in between the leaves and the main stem. Those are called suckers. So when we talk about pruning, that's what we're going to be taking a look at. We can turn our plant around here and you'll be able to see one right here, right in between this main leaf right here and the stem. So we're going to be taking a look at those today, and we'll also take a look at our plants right out in the garden a little bit later, and we'll do some pruning with those as well. And when we look at those, you'll notice that there's a difference in size and growth pattern of our plants between the ones that we're growing in containers and the ones we're growing in the field, so we'll talk a little bit about that. And we might have to come back a little bit later and add some more compost to our pots or some amendments to give it some more nutrients as they keep growing in these pots right here. Okay, so then we're going to take a look at pruning our tomato plant. So you'll notice that there's suckers in between that we were just talking about, and there's little ones in between a big leaf and the main stem all the way as you go up. You'll see little suckers starting right in between all the way to the top. So we'll start at the bottom, and this one will probably be bigger because the suckers start growing toward the base a little bit earlier, and then they'll grow as it travels up and gets taller. So if they are about 2 to 4 inches tall, you can probably snap them off with just using your fingernail and your fingers, and it'll break at its natural breaking point. If you want to bend up and then you'll bend down, it should snap off at its point that it would want to break off, and you can just use your fingernail to help it, and you'll get off a sucker that looks like this. It looks just like maybe a baby tomato plant. And if it was earlier in the season, it's a little bit late right now, but you could just take this and put it in a jar of water. You take off that bottom leaf, put it in a jar of water, and eventually it'll grow roots, and then you could pot it in another little pot and start another tomato plant right off that same plant. So we'll keep traveling up, and you'll see new little ones right here in between the leaf, this big leaf right here, and the main stem of our plant. There's this another little shoot right here. So again, we'll just bend up and down, and then just use your thumb and snap it off. These ones are a little bit too small. So you just kind of put it in the dirt. It'll break it down itself. You can just put it right down in there. But as you go up, you just pop all the suckers that are in between the leaves and the stem. And really, when you're looking at your tomato plants just for home gardening, this is mainly just to create airflow in between the leaves and the stem, and then eventually your flowers and your fruit up here. You want to have good airflow just so that it's not too wet. They get to dry out. If it does start to get rainy and wet, it's very dry right now, so it would probably be okay. But you want good airflow in there just so it's less susceptible to different kinds of diseases. There's early blight, late blights, eventually that will come throughout the season. And if you have good airflow and it's nice and pruned up and it's staked in your pot or in your garden, that'll help it out. So just went up and snipped off all of these shoots. I usually do it all the way up, and when they talk about different plants, if you're growing tomatoes in a high tunnel, right now it's out in the garden, so you could leave a couple of those at the top if you wanted. Mostly just get the ones on the lower half of your plant to keep it nice and open. But you could go all the way until you see your first set of flowers right here, where it's going to have its first tomato plants right here at the top. And I would leave the one sucker directly below that, and then you can have two leaders, they call them, or two branches that are going to then grow and produce different sets of fruits. So this one looks pretty good. So here we are out in the garden with our plants that we planted right into our long raised rows. And I think you can probably tell, you can see how much shorter. So here's the top of our stakes, how much shorter they are than our other ones. Our other ones were about a couple inches above our stakes, so about up here. And they're just right here. They're a lot bushier. There's a lot more foliage, a lot more leaves, a lot more suckers. Some pretty large suckers that we'll actually have to use our scissors to cut off. I did prune a couple of the other ones that are out here already, and I did that about a week ago. But these ones that I left, just so you can see how much bushier they were actually growing. They look a lot more healthier than our containers, so it was really interesting to see that there's a really big difference between growing the same tomato plants in the containers as there are in the garden. I actually, when I chose to put the plants in the containers, I actually chose larger ones to grow in the containers just because they were bigger and I thought they would do better. So these actually started out a little bit smaller, and they've gotten really thick stems, really healthy looking leaves, and even the suckers are really healthy looking. So they just look like beautiful plants out here. So way down at the bottom, there's a big sucker that I'll actually cut off, and you can see how big compared to the other ones, how big this is. So this is quite late. I'm probably about a couple weeks late of getting this one off the plant because it's so large. But there's a lot more of these suckers as we go up the plant that are still really big. And they're very bushy and have a lot of leaves going all over the place. The suckers are coming up in between the leaves, so they're not as spaced out and they won't have as good airflow as the other ones that we were talking about. And even the other plants that are in this same row that I had pruned about a couple days ago, maybe a week ago, I only took off the suckers, and they have a lot more room. You can see over here, just even this one has a lot more room, a lot more open space for these big leaves and not all those suckers coming up. And I already pruned to have the two leaders at the top, and they're already starting to do a strong Y at the top really nicely. And they just have a lot more space to have a lot of air flowing in between. So compared to these two that we're working on right here that are a lot bushier, and they're just kind of overlapping on each other quite a bit. So I'm going to continue to take off some of these. I'm okay with taking some of these suckers off and not having as many fruit sets right now. And I had already taken a couple of the bottom leaves off just so that they weren't touching the ground. Like this one is a really large one. I had already started to set its own little fruit set right here. So I'm okay with taking that off now to make sure that the plant keeps growing a little bit taller, healthier, and putting more nutrients into those top fruit sets. So I'll take off a few more. And then I can pinch off the littler ones at the top, and I'll leave one more right at the top. So that looks better. And you, again, just like the other ones, you'll have to continue for a couple more weeks of just snipping off some of those other suckers that'll start. And then as it continues to grow as well, inside your cage, you're going to want to help some of these leaves gently over the top because it's going to keep growing up straight. This one doesn't have a cage on it, so we're going to kind of see how they do inside a cage or just with a stake. So these are all the just suckers that you could go and put in glass jars of water and start some new roots and then have some new plants on there. Potentially, I'm not sure if you'd be able to get them to start roots and pot them enough in time to have them produce fruit and be able to harvest by the end of the season. So if you would have done it a little bit earlier, Then we could have had some more plants for later in the season. So then I'll continue with this one. So I hope you guys learned something about pruning and taking care of your tomato plants as they grow and throughout the season. And I'll see you next time. Hopefully you can give this a try. And then we'll see you when we have our harvest of cucumbers and lettuce and cherry tomatoes.